This is the GerleMen podcast. My name is Mike Gurley, and I'm the host and founder of GerleMen.com, a site for gay men and anyone self-identified as the other, designed to help you invest in your own dignity, strengthen your connection with your chosen families, and thrive in general society. Now that you've found us, please hit that subscribe button. It was exciting thinking about interviewing Jay Rodriguez because I'd seen him on Queer Eye. And then I realized I'd seen him perform in one of my favorite musicals ever, Zanna Don't. So I was a bit starstruck. I don't like admitting that, but I was. Then the real magic happened when we spoke. One gay man talking to another. Jay is approachable and tells us how it really is for queer people in Hollywood, how COVID-19 is affecting his sex life, growing up evangelical, and being a mentor. This high-energy interview that moves very fast is ready for you now, so buckle your seatbelts, boys. This man is going to tell you what's really going on. The moment you realized you were a gay man, you were forced onto the path of the other, so you know oppression inside and out. The calling of otherness has led you on your own hero's journey, and that journey has prepared you for greatness. You are a man answering the call to brotherhood, to conscious sex, and to heart-centered connection. Welcome home, brother. Well, welcome, Jade Rodriguez. Thank you for being on the GerleMen podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. And first of all, what lovely surroundings you have there.
Thank you. This is the corner of the condo made into it was impossible for anything else. It was this little weird triangle. It's a great sound booth. You know, I hear a lot of people are back in the closet with podcasts, and luckily...
Yeah, I've seen a couple concerts from closets as well.
Yeah, I don't have to be in one. Well, I like to start asking how you are, how you're feeling, because I think our feelings are really important.
Yeah, yesterday, I think Monday it was, I posted that it's really been an emotional roller coaster. I'm feeling okay today. I got up a little earlier, did the normal household errands that I do in the morning, feed and walk the dog the whole bit. But just being unemployed, and today I had several scheduled calls with managers and bookers, and just to kind of reevaluate where we are months into the pandemic as to what work will look like for me.
What is happening? What are people saying about the future of the industry right now?
Yeah, so it feels like, a lot of companies are purchasing shows, understanding that once things are a bit safer to make programming, there's going to be in high demand. So there is work hopefully down the line that will be employing a lot of people in the industry. Now, I am an in front of the camera guy, but when we talk about behind the scenes, I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of employees, middle-class families who, survive gig to gig, whether you're talking about people who are grips or makeup or hair camera people. These are not millionaires. These are not people who, because they work in Hollywood, are part of the elite. And I also would like to mention that a lot of the performers you see on television shows are paid a one-time nominal fee of what industry standard is considered. And I know that for the infrequency that a lot of your familiar faces work, they barely can make ends meet as it is. But the optics are that there's fame attached to them, so they must be financially stable. But I can attest to the fact that I've been speaking to many people, and many of us aren't. We rely on so many sources of income. And when you talk about, Hollywood actors, you're really kind of honing in on maybe the 1 or 2% of the population who've done such epic projects that they don't ever need to work again. That's not the case for most performers.
Well, let's talk about Queer Eye. Why do you think it's been such a success? I mean, the way I remember TV history up before that, we were getting roles or we were being portrayed here and there and whatnot. Then all of a sudden, we're the show.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, it was off the heels of Queer as Folk L Word. Queer as Folk L Word were a scripted series, gay content, already on the air, Will and Grace. So now you get the trifecta proven. And those, L Word and Queer as Folk were cable. But NBC took a chance and did Will and Grace, huge hit. So then the Ellen DeGeneres talk show picks up, and it becomes a huge hit. So Bravo, which is a subsidiary of NBC, had this little show that they were taking a chance with. Nothing really was on Bravo other than inside the actor's studio that rated well. That was it. This was pre-Housewives. Trust me, in that era, no one knew what a Vanderpump was. To me, a Vanderpump was a thing I would do late at night before bed to James Van Der Beek. So For me, I just instantly, I kind of got the sense that that era and that time was going to be an explosion of visibility for gay scripted content. And I was starring in Zanna Don't, this off-Broadway cult classic. I had my name above the title, billboards all over town, including Times Square above the Virgin Megastore with my little magical wand in my face. It was a big deal for me. It was really, and that was like 23 years old, right?
Mm.
So it was such a massive thing. And so when we got the show, we didn't think it'd be anything. All of us had plans to go back to our normal lives right after. No one quit their jobs. So, we're all supposed to go back to work. And then 2 weeks in, we just got noticed that it like tripled the ratings in Bravo's history. They were going to put us right after Will and Grace to see how we did. We held their ratings and increased it. So it was a lot of this big magnitude. And during that time, we weren't playing characters. We're being ourselves.
Yeah.
Which was career suicide, people were telling me. And I will actually go on record and say that in some ways it kind of was for me. My first play at Lincoln Center was a play called Spinning into Butter that dealt with racism on a college campus. My character was straight. He was a college student that had been wronged by the dean of students. And it was this great play. Spike Lee was at opening night and I played this inner city kid. Those roles never came my way after that because people were like, oh, he's gay. And I just saw him on this series on Bravo where everyone's all caffeinated up or, shooting the show with a light buzz if it was the loft, so for us, I think we thought we were just making a makeover show, but what the cultural impact or significance, I don't think we were aware of in the moment, which was for the first time, the world got to see queer men that they might not have had access to in their normal day-to-day lives. And they invited them over, and not just over anywhere, into their bedrooms, their kitchens, their living rooms, wherever their TVs were. And TVs are a much more intimate form of media versus the movie theaters. If you see a TV star and it's not scripted, you feel like you know them, they're your friends. And suddenly we couldn't go anywhere without anyone, wanting to say things to us. Years later, 17 years exactly, we started production on the show, May 2003. I don't think any of us knew what we were getting into. And at that time, the big deal was you have to be out and gay. And I remember my agent saying, are you ready to make that kind of commitment? And I did, because honestly, I was like, no one's going to watch it. I thought no one would ever see it. It was on a little station that, again, no one was really, wasn't on the tip of everyone's tongue like it is now, Bravo TV. And I think the trickiest part for me was coming onto the show in the category of culture. They had a pilot guy in that role. He was not asked to move forward when the show was bought by Bravo finally and found a home. Then they hired another guy named Blair who did culture for 2 episodes. He was fired and replaced by me. And I was introduced to you on episode 1, and episodes 2 and 3 were of the.
Well, how did that feel, knowing that the previous 2 guys before you were fired?
I think,
was it extra pressure?
I knew it was slowly going to be turning into Queer Eye for the White Guy, because it was an entirely white cast with mostly an entirely white production staff. And so I knew that I wanted to, coming from Rent, a multi-ethnic show for half a decade and having experiences of being, brown and queer in entertainment, I was bringing something already different to the table. Also being a decade younger. A lot of the references that they had weren't references that I knew of or cared about. And so taking a page of what they knew and just kind of learning from my elders, but also teaching them about the things that were new was important to me. We don't have a whole lot of, what I like being now, and I like that there exists now a lot of elders, because my elders, the generation above me, didn't have any, because many of them were sadly taken away because of the AIDS epidemic. Yeah. And when you think about, being a performer for half a decade and being very successful in that space, and then getting a reality show that diminishes you to being somewhat of a Puerto Rican Emily Post, and having SNL parody you and Mad TV parody you as useless, as a useless force on the show, it doesn't do a whole lot to instill confidence. And so I had to really remember that I was a performer, and sadly, I was asked repeatedly to tone that down, because if I'm an actor, well, maybe all the other guys are acting as well. And so when you have that legacy moving forward, people seeing you as useless and not understanding what you're actually good at, because the show didn't really elevate that in any way. Unlike the other guys, unlike probably any Queer Eye guy, I never got a 6-figure, 7-figure endorsement deal like all my Queer Eye guys. And, if we really want to talk about it, I think Billy Porter says it best. I grew up in the 90s revering Billy Porter as a Broadway star because I grew up listening to the soundtracks he was on. And then all of a sudden he had this massive gap in employment. And as he says it now, he was unhireable because he was Black and too femme presenting. And I think that while I was having a great good old time and gaying it up for Queer Eye, people were not anxious to hire me after, because they didn't feel I was safe or the kind of gay that would be accepted. Times have certainly shifted, but many of us took massive hits to our career. And I'm not including the Queer Eye boys. I don't know their story. But I left Queer Eye in a very different financial situation than any of my other brothers.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because, I think my parents meant well raising me, but in Nebraska, Wyoming, and Idaho, they were telling me where everybody was white. So there was nothing to like check this on. They were telling us that there used to be a race problem, but we fixed it in the 60s and everything's good now. And I moved out here and I slowly realized that just wasn't true. So
it's not, it wasn't. I grew up in a Puerto Rican Italian household where people with my skin complexion, on the Puerto Rican side, some even darker, who could pass for African American. And my Puerto Rican family was the most racist out of any groupings I'd ever been a part of. And all the things that they had told me about people of color, which was so odd that they would have that kind of view, being that we literally looked like members of our family could pass for African American, and that there was such ignorance and bias toward them. I was very, very shocked. With the time I started going to the first church my mother really set us up in, it was an evangelical church, and when we were the lightest skinned people there. And when I started to go to school, primary school and junior high, I started realizing that the tropes and all the kind of cliches they used to say about other races were just wildly inaccurate. And then obviously getting rent, working with a multi-ethnic cast, I was like, this is ridiculous. But all that ideology, all of it still is in play. In fact, I was on Twitter yesterday, and I think it was the UK Times or UK Gay Times put like 10 must-see movies, like 10 must-see LGBTQ films. Not one of them had any out LGBTQ people of color in leading roles. They had 6 Feet Under, but the actor who played it was straight. It was just this big whitewashing. And even if you're lucky or fortunate enough to get into an LGBTQ themed TV series or movie, you're never 1 or 2 on the call sheet. You're always 3, 4, or 5, meaning you have the 4th, 5th, or 6th largest role in the film or project. And there aren't many projects out there that really speak to the experience of some of us who moved here. When I moved here from New York, I remember going to Here Lounge and having some guy come up to me and we're dancing, and he's like, "You're pretty hot for a Latin guy." I mean, no, it's not. I'm not. It's just like it's not my preference. And you're like,
yeah,
I hear what you think you mean by it, but you do anyway. So I think race plays a very integral role in our society in terms of us acknowledging the differences that exist when it comes to privilege. And I think it's not about shaming people. It's just enlightening them to other people's experience so that we can be more compassionate and take care of each other the way we should.
Yeah. And I've had a journey myself. I'm a big, tall, white guy, and just experiencing all kinds of privilege I didn't have a clue I was enjoying.
But how could you, unless you saw it firsthand, it was a family friend or a really close person to you. Yeah. I think, you can only hear so much that people tell you. And when it becomes personal to you, then I think that was part of Harvey Milk's messaging, come out, come out, come out. He wanted as many people to be visible as possible so that we could say, hey, I'm not just, your cousin. I'm also a gay man, like the thing that you say you hate, or whatever the case might be.
Well, for me, I think it was Larissa Fuchs. Hey, Larissa. We worked next to each other for about 15 of the 23 years I worked at West Hollywood City Hall. Mm-hmm. And she saw the young me. I'm so embarrassed now, talking about, oh, the world's fair, the world's perfect. And she's like, what world do you live in? And she's like one of the 3 people I wanted at my retirement party, later, 23 years later. And just to seeing the slight, just as it happens in real time, real slights, real passes, real people living in a world of non-privilege. But
here's the other thing too. If you look at our media, that many of these websites that we follow for the LGBTQ plus community do not do features, or oftentimes not on their cover have people of color. It's rare, exceptionally rare. And so when I look at sometimes an Instagram account to an LGBTQ plus population, it's a sea of really gorgeous, like ripped white guys, and not a whole lot of diversity. And they'll put a body positive image, I'm like, you're literally, the body positive image is the majority of people who live and socialize in the city. The, smaller percentage.
When you say body positive, what are you saying? For the people who don't live in Los Angeles.
Coded language for body positivity is when someone is outside of shape and then they just say to them, oh, they're so body positive, meaning, oh, they're not ripped or they don't have the Equinox body, so they're body positive. I'm like, well, you don't know that. They might actually be quite negative about their body and they should be body positive, but we all should be looking at things in a different way. Great example. The kid from Twilight is now playing the new Batman. I forget his name. The Kristen Stewart's ex. And he made an announcement that he doesn't want to work out for the role. Because he's like,
wow.
I don't understand why Batman has to be super ripped. These guys go to the gym for 4 months, 6 months prior to these shoots, do everything legal and illegal to change these bodies for a short blip of time. And I just think it sends the wrong message. And I kind of stand for that. Here's why. I want them physically capable to do all these things. But the truth is, people whose strength is not always about having 0% body fat and being on all the, it's just not.
Yeah.
And so I think this comes back to my greater point. If you look at our community, we only elevate certain types of queer folks. And that is, trans people have this conversation a lot. It's like the cis-passing trans folks sometimes get more visibility than their non-passing brothers and sisters or non-passing family. Then if you look at the gay community, I remember hosting a night one time in West Hollywood and I was the host. It was my night. And they're like, we're going to put a stock image of this model. And it was a white model.
Wow.
And they were like, well, because we don't want people to think it's Latin night. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Does that mean that we can never have a person of color on an ad because it's indicative of what you think their music, that person represents? So it was just really tricky, I think, when I first got here. But the issue of race is far from over. I watched a great conversation with Bob the Drag Queen and Peppermint where they talk about the fandom and how racist the fandom of the drag race world can be. But it's just a small microcosm of everything else. So
yeah, I would assume that the world of drag is just as diverse as the lesbian world or the gay world or the
people are shocked though. People are shocked. They're like, wait a minute, straight people are like, wait, there's like, you could be racist and LGBT. I'm like, yeah, girl.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Big time. Well, while we're on it, can you talk about playing a gender fluid role like Angel and an actual trans?
I definitely want to dive into this, and I'm so glad for you to have brought this up because it's not something that I talk about enough of, and I really like it. So when I got Rent, I knew the show. When I saw, I didn't quite understand the Angel thing. I'd never seen a drag queen. I knew of RuPaul, everyone did from the You Better work, but I didn't know, to be honest, what parts she had, if she had transitioned. I didn't know as a teenager what drag meant. Then I get the show and they're fitting me up and we're not tucking, we're not using any padding for breasts or hips and they would have me shave and use pressed powder on my face. You can kind of see my beard up close. They're like, it's stage, who cares? And then as it was taught to me, I was an actor, but didn't know much about queer culture or a drag queen. And I kept playing the character as female, like as a cisgender biological female Angel.
How old were you?
18. And the director was like, I'm sending you home with some homework. I had to watch Tu Wong Fu, Paris is Burning, learn the difference between drag queens and trans women. And he kept saying, Jay, boy in a dress. Your voice should always be the same if you're in and out of drag, which I had, a young gay boy voice anyway. But yeah, so for me, I don't see Angel as a trans character because, she lived her life as a man and would perform in the art form of drag, and based on the costuming and everything else, and that era that I was alive for and participated in, I saw Angel as more of a street performer, drag queen. That's my feeling based on everything I know and was taught by the original creative team. Then you move forward to, I'm in LA, and because I did Rent, every drag role is now at my feet. And I turned down a couple because they were poor depictions of drag culture. And then I got an opportunity to audition for David E. Kelley, who wrote, obviously, Ally McBeal, Boston Legal, you name it, just big hit show. And it was starring Kathy Bates. It was called Harry's Law. It's about a woman named Harriet who opens up a law firm. She's in hard times. She needs a rental space. So she's basically working out of a shoe store. And so it's like a shoe store / law office. And the character was that of a trans woman, but it wasn't written that way. In the actual audition, the sheet they sent to agents and stuff, it said, we are not seeing trans performers, nor are we seeing professional drag queens. They kept referencing Madame Butterfly, which I thought was an interesting reference. So then I booked this role. I only did this, and this is probably about 10 years ago, a decade ago. I today would never, ever audition for any trans characters. There's enough trans actors that should be allowed because they previously were not to tell their own stories. And so I don't ever need to perform as a trans person unless the character begins as a cisgendered man and has this whole transitional journey. But even then, I'd prefer them to see trans people first. But I took this role because I'd seen trans people and drag queens depicted so inaccurately on camera, and having grew up around so many great trans people when I graduated college and I graduated high school and started Rent, that I wanted to make sure their story was told accurately. And that's the only reason I took it a decade ago. And I was given a lot of freedoms, but also I recognized how much confusion there was on set. The hair designer thought it was a drag queen. The makeup person understood that she was trans, that she lived as a woman and she had trans friends. The wardrobe department understood that she was trans and that she lives as a woman. I believe the show took place in Cincinnati, and having to have that conversation was really tricky to get everyone into alignment. The word trans was never used.
Wow.
And she just referenced living as a woman. And she says, retreating into her stage persona is more than an escape, it's home. And I remember, when that episode aired, when you click on the info, like let's say it was airing tonight and you wanted to DVR it, and you click on the info, it said Jay Rodriguez guest stars as Amanda Knott, a drag performer, blah, 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 this transsexual, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, whoa, the language is so wrong. So thankfully I called GLAAD, which tackles our representation in media. And I got to speak to someone who literally was like, I just had lunch with the good folks over at NBC. So they know me very well. And we were talking about these kinds of issues. Let me point this out. And they corrected it within 2 hours. Okay. So, I've always been an advocate for the trans community, having had so many trans women sort of raise me as mother figures in my 20s and even today, that it was unfortunate and a travesty that they could not even be seen for these roles. But thankfully, due to Courageous Networks and Trailblazers, trans women trans performers of all kinds of gender identities are here to stay, and they should be the ones to be up for these roles and tell their own stories, because there's still bias in the industry.
Yeah. And I think it's so nuanced, and every individual represents differently, right? You were talking the difference between Angel and this other role.
Yeah, because Angel was literally a drag queen that we see as boy a whole lot, and Amanda lives as a woman. You would never see her, anything but. And we even use liquid latex on my face so that I never had a 5 o'clock shadow, because it was meant to appear that I had gotten electrolysis, and I could, they weren't even open to the word trans, because at that time it was not loosely thrown around as it is now. Trans at that time, most heterosexuals saw it as transsexual. You know what I mean? Like, and they didn't know the difference of a drag performer versus someone who is transgender, who may have had some kind of reassignments done to their body, or altered their body in some way to align with how they felt on the inside, to some people who just identify as trans or different gender, who feel complete with no surgeries. I'm really good friends with a girlfriend of mine who is from the Philippines, and she's an open transgender performer. She was on The Voice, and she's never had anything. She's very open about that. She feels complete in her body. She presents very cisgender, passable female, but she's a nurse by trade as well. And so she does not, at this moment in her life, feel inclined to alter her body in any way, but she is a woman. And so that's a very difficult topic 10 years ago to have people understand.
Yeah. I mean,
I was long-winded.
Well, I thank you, though. I want people to hear about these things. You and I are in it here in West Hollywood and California. I'm going to Branson maybe in July to visit my family, and they wouldn't know any of these things. Cis, trans, the difference between a drag queen and a trans woman. These are things that are important.
The gender identity thing always trips me up, because I always, not in terms of I mess it up, but I just think it's an interesting conversation to start with people who feel anti-trans. And I always wonder, and they're like, well, I just want to know what gender they are. I was like, why is it important for you to know what organs they have downstairs or what they look like? Why is that how does that impact your life? And if you need to know their gender, does that mean you will now treat them differently? If it's a man, you'll be frightened of this person, and you will feel like they're a danger to you. And if it's in your mind, you believe this person to be a woman, then you can speak down to her, pay her less. Where are we really getting at when we talk about what gender identity means to people who are frightened of trans folks? What are they really trying to say? I don't
Well,
understand how gender plays into like anything. As long as someone's a good person, you know what I mean? I don't understand why you would have any, it's none
yeah,
of your
well,
business.
people are really difficult with gray, right? People want one thing or the on or off, black or white. Like bi people, I was one of those people like saying, "Make up your mind, make up your mind." Until recently, last year, I went to this great training. It was the Mankind Project, and it's mostly a straight organization where you do men's work and get in touch with your feelings. I really love it. It's very helpful
God,
for me.
it's been so long since I've done any men's work.
Oh wow, well this was amazing, and
I
I
mean,
got
like men's work.
men's work, not work on that
Yeah.
kind. Okay, yeah. I know it's right. I'm lucky to have a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about COVID boyfriend negotiating because I think
Ooh, yeah.
that's really needs to be a thing now.
Mm-hmm.
My best friend and business partner is single, and this is really tough for him. And I'm just like, you need to find something that's just, I mean, go through your list. Who are your regular hookups? And maybe you find one and make an agreement or something.
I think unfortunately, because the lockdown being as long as it's likely going to be before we have any kind of open release where we're allowed to socialize in that way again, hookup culture has to adjust and follow suit with that. But I would be lying if I didn't say that even as early as last night, I had someone who I've never hooked up with, but has wanted to hook up with me. So they had rented a hotel room and they was having a couple people over for a sex party. And I was like, first of all, A, I'm very flattered that you think I'd even go to a sex party. So good on you for taking a chance there. But B, I think there is an overall kind of invincibility that some gay people are feeling toward this, especially those who didn't grow up around a pre-PrEP era. And
Oh,
what I
yeah.
mean by that is many of us remember what it was like to live through a time in HIV where you never knew who was positive, and you'd start dating, you'd use condoms, and you go see a physician together, and then if you both tested negative, this is what they would tell you, and then you would basically just do the honor system, like I'll never cheat on you, you won't cheat on me, and it was just a very tricky system. Or some people were like, listen, it was before the science came out that let us know that you equals you, which thank God we have that now, and people should really embrace that.
You mean
that
undetectable
science.
means untransmittable?
That's right. Which means if you have such a low viral load of HIV in your body that they can't even detect it in a lab.
And I was undetectable for 8 years before they said that.
Damn it! We all could have been having sex with you. No, I'm just kidding.
Anyway.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think that's a thing, and I think there's going to be a COVID stigma. There's going to be a lot of people who will fall into the same traps. And by traps, I mean, I have a couple friends who were too, I'm going to say prudish, to get on PrEP because they believed PrEP was something for whores and sluts, their words.
Yeah, like the birth control my mom takes.
That's right. And the two of them that said that and shamed me for having even the discussion about PrEP ended up testing positive for using the honor system of what he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who, we're both not all about that hookup life. It's not what it's about. So as people start to navigate this COVID land.
Yeah, it's science. It's not morality.
You do have to understand that you will be taking a risk for every person this person comes into contact with, that they are exposing themselves and ultimately you. And you have to figure out those risks and what makes sense for you. For me, I'm always more emotionally, my arousal is linked to emotions. So I want to have some kind of connection, even if it's a friends with benefits situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not in a place right now where I think any of my friends with benefits I had previously would want to just lock it down and just be with me. So then you're increasing your numbers exponentially, because even if they hook up with like 3 people and those people each hook up with 3 people, now you're basically having a massive orgy every time you hook up. And I don't know where I'm at with that. I mean, I have this joke. I'm like, I just need a quarantine boyfriend. We get to know each other digitally for a while, see how things go, and then decide to unquarantine together, while we get through this pandemic. But I'm not inclined to be as liberal sexually as I probably would have been pre-COVID, only for the fact that I've had people very close to me have had really bad experiences with COVID. The other piece about that too is, as many people that are going to be overly cautious, and not cautious at all, there's going to be a bunch of people who are going to be reimagining ways of what safety looks like to them. And so it is going to be about, look, I just got, hopefully testing will be a little easier. So it's not like I scheduled an appointment, it's in 6 weeks from now, and then I'll know that I'm good for two, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if testing's a little easier, I think it'll streamline our ability to connect with others in a way that feels safe. My only issue is, and I'm very sex positive, my only issue becomes I am unemployed. Could I, the minute this opens up and we have access to be able to work, really take a hit and be down for the count for 5 weeks? I don't think I can. My best friend is 35, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, and has been going through this for 5 weeks until he felt some semblance of normal, was in the ER twice. So I do all the things. I'm like, that's not going to hit me well. I'm, going to be 41 in a month. So it's like, for me, I don't want to take chances, because even if I live, if I happen to be lucky enough to be part of the 99% of people, or whatever the figure is, that does okay is pretty relative. And I just wouldn't want to be, inhibiting my ability to get back on my feet and, get back into the workforce. Because opportunities, it's not like a 9-to-5 job. I can't just be like, oh, thank you for the offer of that role. Can you postpone production of just my scenes? Because I got I got scotched to the COVID. That's not going to work. But trust me, that is not to say that I'm any less horny than anyone else. Because if anything, it's like the hormones are raging even more because we can't hook up. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the real about that.
It's really tough. You grew up in a conservative evangelical home. What was that like?
I think that growing up in a really insular home, single parent, my grandmother raised me and my mother basically as siblings. My mom had me young, and I feel it didn't change much for her when she had me. She just kind of went back to being a 20-some-odd-year-old partying with her friends. And I guess unbeknownst to her, I just kind of more bonded with my grandmother, and she became the mother figure to both of us. And we grew up in my mother's childhood home, so nothing really changed. And when I was like 12, we moved in together to our first place, and that's when my mom instilled religion. And it started very evangelical, and then it kind of lightened up to one of those mega churches that was a little more cool and hip. And what I learned as a teenager was that my mom was very immature, and that her development as a grown-up had really stopped. When things appeared that she didn't know anything about, she would put her head in the sand and say, well, I don't know. As opposed to me, I instantly then wanted to find out the why. Well, we just, because they said, I don't know. They said, who's they? I don't know. I read it somewhere. That's not enough for me, never has been. But what it's given me is the compassion for the conservative point of view, specifically the religious one. I understand why they believe what they believe, and I certainly understand why some of them have been indoctrinated to believe some of the hate that they believe about certain groups of folks. And I think
that's really big. I mean, I got to say, Jay, that's fascinating. I feel the same way. I was raised Mormon, and people look at me cross-eyed when I say, what you're saying is like, I can understand them.
Yeah. Listen, listen, because if it's all you know, for instance, I want to just lay this out. No TV nor secular music was allowed in the house. I was not allowed to watch secular TV, movies, music. So if all you know is what you're being taught at church or via your family, that's all you know. You don't have exposure to anything else in the outside world. And when you don't leave your community, or you surround yourself with people who are only like you, you don't really have a broader understanding of what the world is at large. And if I could add to that point, I would say, if God created everything, isn't getting to know everything getting to know God?
Wow.
If I am a piece of God's personality, if I am the essence of what God created, even if we want to take people out of the situation, if seeing a different part of the world and the way they live, Christians there live, let's use Christians as an example, and the differences in culture, that's still God. What do you think? There's going to be separate heavens for different folks? You know what I mean? Like, if you believe in that. So I think it starts there, about having the compassion for, I know why you believe what you believe. I understand why this is important and vital. And it's not just the religious aspect, but the religious becomes like an institution of culture. It's all people know. It's a way of living outside of just the religious aspect of it.
Well, let me put you on the spot for a second and say, what's your personal God concept?
I have to tell you, I've really leaned into watching a lot of documentaries ever since Netflix came to be a thing, and about all religions. I'm fascinated by them. I'm fascinated by how many of them have so much crossover of some of the same stories.
Yeah.
The same core principles tend to be a good freaking person and to love one another and be kind. And so, of course, you have extremist groups that take things too far. But I don't think I can subscribe to any one religion, because growing up in the behind the scenes of the church, I saw a lot of indiscretions that were swept under the rug. And I remember one time there was an accusation made against me that I had done something with a boy when I knew I hadn't. And the boy had lied and said that I had solicited him in some kind of way for some kind of sex act. And I know for a fact I hadn't. And my mother knew, interestingly enough, that I hadn't, because when he said that all happened, I was at home with my mother, and he thought I was out with my then girlfriend. So he thought he could use that. When we went to approach the pastors about this, they didn't believe me.
Wow.
They said they had prayed on it and God had spoken to them that this had happened. And in that instant, I literally was like, you don't know God then. Like you're literally not believing truth. So that leads me to believe that God doesn't exist the way you say it does, or your relationship or your direct communication is filtered through your own bias.
Yeah, I had that kind of, I didn't have that specific kind of thing, but at one point I was like, God either is what they say, all knowing and loving, or he's something else, this weird, hateful, controlling thing that, is all wrapped up in our local government. And I don't think God cares that much about the local government. And I had to decide, I'm going to go with the God that knows everything. And deep down, I know I'm awesome. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to take it between me and God.
Yeah.
This is a conversation between me and God. You people no longer need to be involved.
Yeah, honestly, I agree with that. And let's not forget that, the churches are a tax-free business as well. For them to stay in business, they can't have empty, seats. And so I remember one of the things I was taught was they will know we are Christians by our love. Haven't really ever stopped someone and said, hey, you're so loving. What's the secret to your happiness?
Yeah.
I haven't. It's never been, oh, I'm a Christian. And it should be. It should be, but in this modern age, I've never seen someone be so kind unto others or filled with so much joy and love that I was taken aback and had to ask them the source of that, and they said Christ. Never had that happen. And I've worked with many Christians, devout ones,
Yeah. Well, out here it seems to be coming. It seems to come from like yoga and Hindu and Buddhist stuff. I mean, that's where I'm constantly hearing love, love, love. Love yourself exactly the way you are right now, Queen.
And there's so many of the same practices labeled different things, whether it's prayer and meditation. That if you say meditation in the wrong way around Christians, they're like, that's ungodly. That's you're worshiping like spiritual, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, and there's so many practices that we physicalize in our bodies that take us to this kind of really Zen place or place of enlightenment, that the physical feeling of it is so universally felt, but there's different practices that get people feeling that feeling, and they all have labeled them different things. It's literally just like the mind-body connection. And when they start aligning those things, they're like, it's God, and I'm going to name it this, So I don't know. I really don't know. I do believe that there's something greater than us, even if it's just the collective us being sort of this united spirit of energy. But I don't know. I do believe in energy. I'm kind of open, to be honest.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great place to be. Since we're in that realm now, you're 41, what advice would you give to your
I'm not
16...
41 yet. June 22nd. Jeez. I'm but a child.
I know. You're practically a baby. Yeah. Oh, you're a full-on adult. It's on you. You're doing the heavy lifting. You're in charge. Yeah. How does that feel?
I know. Ugh.
Yeah.
I mean, that does track with my sexuality, but carry on.
Okay, good. Oh, well, then that's perfect. So what advice do you have for your 16-year-old self, or just some
I think I would have been, I think I would have been, that was the age a lot of things happened. My aunt died of AIDS-related complications. She had 2.5 kids, the house, the car, the boats. Shouldn't have happened to her. And I saw the discrimination. I remember taking her to the dentist and the dentist putting on 4 pairs of gloves, and she turned her face to wipe a tear. I remember, that time in my life also being the time where someone tried to call me out as gay in church and make a big spectacle about it. And I remember being so wildly afraid of standing up for myself. Remember when I was 15, Mr. Eastman, Smithtown High School, social studies, we had an HIV/AIDS like informational thing in the auditorium, and he would not let us go. And he said, if you're an IV drug user or a gay man, then you can go. And then there was like an audible, like kind of gasp in the room. And he was like, what? If you're a gay man and you stick your penis in another man's butt, get up and leave. Other than that, we're continuing this lesson. And so I wish that there were moments when I was 16 where everything really started coming to a head and would ultimately form who I was later to champion for myself and others. And I wish I would have been more vocal and trusted that it would have been okay. But I was such a rule follower and so indoctrinated by what I had learned at that church, which now in hindsight, elements of it felt very cult-like. So I probably would have try to find ways to reach out to queer elders, to maybe look in the phone books for a local LGBTQ center and tell them about what I was experiencing, about having been sent to like a kind of a conversion therapy place where it was just meetings and then you get to go home. There was talks about sending me, I believe the name of the place was called Horizon. It was on Long Island. There was talks about sending me there. And this is all before acting on it. Because let's not forget, in the 90s, I mean, by the time you're trying to download a picture of a half-naked man, 47 minutes till you get to a nipple and TRL was on. I was like, I don't have the time. That nipple's enough. So it was just like, I didn't even know what this was. I did not even know what gay sex could be. I definitely thought that putting a penis inside of an anus was like a joke. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was something that people were saying about gay people to diminish who they were. Yeah. About doing this awful act because I had never heard or seen or had conversations about how that was even physiologically possible. Yeah. And so for me, I thought it was this mystical feeling that only I had and kept trying to re-explain it. And I think when I was 16, I wish I had the internet. It was in the school, but who's going to freaking Google gay stuff in your school library with everyone walking around you? Yeah. So I didn't really have exposure to it. And I wish I would have worked harder to find my voice then, because I would have made wildly different choices as an adult.
Wow. That's the advice for you back then. Do you have any advice for young guys today? Let me set this up for a second too. Like Don Kilhafner, one of our queer elders, says we have youth, adults, and elders. And like I'm 55, it's now time for me to be an elder. So I'm supposed to, mentor you, and you are supposed to mentor the youth. Right behind you.
Yeah, you just perfectly said that. I think that what I grew up with a lot of, being the youngest person in Rent, being a decade younger than my queer-eyed brothers, when I was younger, all I heard was, you just don't know. Like, you don't get it. And that language wasn't really helpful for me to understand.
It gives you nothing to move towards.
You have nothing to move towards. So I think it's really about, one, making younger people feel included at events that might be somewhat over their head. Have a reduced ticket price for events like Equality California or GLAAD Awards, where there are people in tuxes or dressed up talking about social justice issues that these kids didn't even know there were platforms like this. Spending time inviting the youth to be engaged politically on their level. I think a lot of the influencers from music and television and stuff who are young are starting to understand that their voice matters. So I think it's not demeaning these people for not knowing or having a lack of education about queer things. I think it's about encouraging them and supporting them. And like you said, like supporting the right choices that they're making and reiterating that you're there for them in a non-sexual way, which is really important, because I feel like a lot of the relationships that I started forming with mentors, ultimately I felt there was underlying sexuality that made it unsafe for me to continue to have them as a mentor. So if you really are open to this, take the sexuality piece out. If your job is really to be a mentor to this person and you can sense that they're not interested in that way, drop that. Because the worst critique is being like the dirty old man who's trying to hit on the young kid. You know what I mean? Like that's like such a cliche, and people have a lot of fear that that's going to happen to them. And if it's something that they're interested in exploring, sure. But, I think we need to be safe for people to come to who are younger than us, who want to explore, who are curious about what we've lived through, and often make suggestions about now they can watch programming movies that won't look, and they're not in black and white, about where we came from, that are beautifully depicting stories and moments about their history that they should know about.
That is beautiful. I do love you hit on all that stuff that I think is so important. And it is difficult in the queer community, or we're talking about the gay men's community, that sexuality is always involved, right? The sexual nature. And I think that maybe we don't talk about it enough. I don't think we just don't, like, we're going to talk about this and let's talk about sex. It's like, we're not going to, because we're in this relationship, it's just like best that we don't have sex. And I want you to know, you're totally my type. I would totally go there. I don't want to cross any like boundary here. I don't want to like molest them with my words, but I do want to like acknowledge, yeah, that's there. We have to deal with it.
That's so appropriate. I'll tell you, for my mental health, I was a part of 2 groups on Facebook that were really overtly sexual in nature, that were started during the pandemic, and I had to remove myself because I started really feeling bad about myself, about like my feelings about posting things about my body, about how ageist one of them was. And to be honest, it actually just started making me feel more anxious than it did and initially was as like exciting and like a way to kind of like relieve anxiety and stress. And in fact, I started feeling just wildly unwelcomed in those spaces.
Oh, wow.
And so you kind of have to like do what feels right for you. And when you talk about mentoring someone and stuff, I had a hard time with it because I recognize I look young-ish, but not to a 22-year-old. They can tell I'm a lot older than them. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And so I think it's tricky because I always remember being the baby. And then when I'm around actual babies now, meaning 22-year-olds, I'm like, oh, we're not like the same. Like we are not contemporaries. And your experience is different than mine. And you now view me as substantially older than you.
Yeah.
And we might have like same music interests or like the same bars or like to play darts or with the same, and it's an interesting thing. And
it's their biological job to challenge everything that we've built.
Yeah.
That's another thing I think people have a hard time dealing with. It's like,
and I think what the messaging was never there for me coming up as to why those things were built to begin with. Like I never got a good form of understanding the why. And if you start letting people know why, I want them to take a sense of pride of it, because ultimately it's going to be their job to keep these things in place.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the only way that we need a way to pass our knowledge on rather than have every generation have to do it on their own.
And they are creating, going to Queer Eye, we are a lost show for this new generation. They don't even know we existed, because 17 years ago we started shooting. So for a 22-year-old, they were a toddler. They didn't see Queer Eye. So, I can't be mad at that, but also I don't want that moment and what that show meant to be erased, because it was really important. And in fact, so many textbooks and museums have attributed that movement as part of the beginning of LGBTQ acceptance to the masses in a really kind of interesting, subversive way. Yeah. However, a 23-year-old, I can't expect him to know what I did or what that meant or why that time was important of all those shows and how it panned out for different people.
Well, I do want to touch on one of my theories about Queer Eye. Sorry to step on you. But one of the things these kids maybe might need to know, one of the things that I think I'm making up, and I want everybody to join me in what I'm making up about Queer Eye, is, I was on the bus seeing the Queer Eye commercial in there, and it was like, feel all the feels. And then I was doing all this other work on myself, on my own feelings. And I'm doing it in this place where a lot of, straight men are trying to like have a feeling other than anger and rage. And it occurred to me that Queer Eye is, it's the modern shaman. It's the modern people. It's like, we're the magic ones who can help you feel, that can have you have a feeling about your core
I agree
self.
with that. And just so you know, our version was never intended to make you feel anything. It was literally supposed to be funny entertainment. And we were shocked when we do our little goodbye to the straight guy. He's gotten makeup, everything looks pretty. Now we remind him what he's got to do. Producer steps in. Okay, John, the boys are going to leave. This is the last time you're ever going to see them. So if you want to say anything, and this is your chance to say your goodbyes, you're never going to see them again. And they would always be like, guys, and they would cry.
That's so beautiful.
And that's what we did. We laughed because we thought they were kidding the first time.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, he's serious. And then we understood slowly the weight of what we were creating. And out of all 5 of my boys, I was the weepy one. I don't know if it's generational or whatever, But the new cast of
I think
Queer
generation
Eye,
has something to do with it.
I agree. And the new cast of Queer Eye, they watched our version. So they felt all the feels. And so did the new producers who produced this show. Many of them were fans. One of them is a friend of mine. He was like, he always says, he's like, I came out because of you, all these things. So understanding that that was what they were shooting for, they're killing it. One of the shows that's new right now that I think is Queer Eye 2.0 is We Are Here, which is Eureka, Bob the Drag Queen, and Shangela for HBO. They go into small towns who are often bigoted, and there's a very high level of bias. These are small towns. They come in full drag, handing out flyers for the drag show they're doing, and they make over 3 people in that town. Straight, gay, old, young, doesn't matter, just pillars of the community, and they put on a local drag show. And the conversations they have on this show really remind me of the way I speak and some of the really heavy conversations that we had that were really inclusive and acceptance. And when you say modern day shaman, I fully 100% believe that's like the best way I could describe what We Are Here makes me feel like, because there's some spaces that they go into on these shows that I was like, I don't even know if I'd have the balls to go there or do that.
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot of brave things.
Well, thanks.
It's getting out there so young and taking on these insane roles, just the artistic intimidation of doing those roles on top of the politics and everything else.
I mean, being out brown and queer in 2003 was innately political,
Yeah. When I was young, when I was freshly coming out, well, probably wasn't until I was in my 30s. But anyway, when we were finally making progress, it was always like 2 G.I. Joe guys like sitting next to each other, talking about how we're 2 white guys in suits and we're a couple and we're just like everybody else.
Well, that's still in the ether, though. There's a certain way that queer people want to push forward the acceptable kind of gay. And that what you're describing, the sort of G.I. Joe thing, a lot of my guys in my show, except from Carson, were really kind of straight passing. You wouldn't clock them first off as being gay. Carson, yes, but it was almost like in that 70s game show style, like Liberace way, where we just accept it and love it. Yeah. And then you had me. And it was really, really tricky because you could sexualize me. I was young, somewhat attractive. You could imagine some kind of sexuality with me. And, that was very, very hard for people to embrace, never mind celebrate. And we come to a place now where people who are other and don't fit the G.I. Joe model of, what people look like, even, for women, having women that present differently than the societal norm of a modern day housewife.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we close up, I want to ask you a question about, what do you do to like invest in yourself, your own personal dignity?
I think I will confirm book by things that scare me. So I will attend events that are outside of my comfort zone, put myself in spaces where I'm meeting new people. I'll buy myself things like I bought this camera with the full intention to be doing a lot more content online. And I probably made 4 videos with this that are not related to content. But the idea was to basically kind of put myself to equip myself with all the physical tools and actual physical spaces that really are about just self-growth and challenging myself to not just see life a different way, but also to be able to take the steps to evolve. I think we're constantly evolving and growing, and I don't like the feeling of feeling stagnant.
You enjoy a stretch. That's something that we do in men's work. We call it. So, but it's usually like, this is the person I want to be. And to stretch me towards that, I'm going to do this challenging thing where I embody that.
Got it. Yeah.
So I think that's important to know what's going on, to consciously invest in yourself, and you're investing in your creativity. Where do you get your support? Who's your chosen family?
Yeah, so that's tricky. So thankfully, I live with my roommate who moved here about 10 years ago, and we just instantly bonded. We're like brothers, and so that's a great support system. My best friend Adam wandered into an open mic I was hosting in West Hollywood, and he looked like Prince Charming, so I kept calling him Prince Charming. It turns out he lived 4 doors down from me, so then we just always spent basically every night together watching TV and having a glass of wine and downloading each other on our days. I have another friend, Jarek, who's sort of that we call him the unofficial mayor of West Hollywood. And, just someone who's really kind of seen these incredible, huge highs and huge lows in my career. And it's interesting because he's such a magnet for everyone that when people come in with, oh my God, that's Jay Rodriguez, and they get all fanny, it's nice to have someone like him around who knows the real me and how simple that I am at my core, that I, don't live this extravagant life and that I'm never going to treat anyone with disrespect or whatever. And then my friend James, who moved here from Seattle, came from similar religious upbringing. He lives one block away, and we talk all the time. Another person I have, David Hernandez from American Idol. He was on the show probably in 2003, and he was in the closet, and it took him a while to come out, but was still performing at Prides. We were considered virtually interchangeable for a while, visually. And we bonded over just music and just being, out and freelance performers. And then the last person who's really my go-to for anything emotional is a guy named Dr. Chris Donahue. He hosts the official Love Line on Channel Q now, but we dated for 3 years. And I helped pitch and get his show sold of him doing therapeutic work. It was two seasons of a show called Bad Sex.
I saw some of that.
Yeah, Bad Love Sex. So he was the host on that. And he's we are each other's kind of check-in for not just professional, but emotional. We really trust each other with therapeutic advice, which is kind of saying a lot because, I went to the school of hard knock life and street smarts, and he's, got a double PhD. And where some instances call for some kind of book smarts, there are others that really need someone who's got a real broad view on the world and can specifically kind of cut through your own bullshit because they know you that well.
Yeah.
So
I've met him. I can see that you would be good for each other. Especially as friends. Well, that's awesome. That's quite the
that's the roll call of the tribe, I think, which is interesting because we're never all together except for like my birthday party or in small packs. There's some crossover, like David and James are really good friends, but it's not like Sex and the City where we all do everything together.
Right. Well, it sounds like they have different capabilities and
they don't socialize in the same spaces. They don't align visually. They're not all the same skin color or body type, and represent different kind of outlets of or expressions here in the queer community.
Wow. Well, thank you. Yeah, Jay, this has been amazing. You are all the stuff I projected on you before. It's still true. Your realness comes through.
Well, thanks.
And I think we need that. That's what gay men need to, if we're going to get into heart-centered connection, we need to see the real person. And I appreciate that you're willing to put that out there. So thank you for coming on GerleMen and showing us who you are.
Anytime. And as you know, I have a huge affinity for the desert. I love Palm Springs. I get out there to do my cabaret show often, and I can't wait to get back there. But till then, I'd like you to put the APB out for a boyfriend, husband, life partner, second boyfriend, although I'd really like to be the first boyfriend because I feel like they get the better stuff. But I'm fine. I'm thinking of something really polyamorous, like a three-way marriage situation. It worked really well for friends of mine who used to own LASC. Now they live in Palm Springs. So at this point at 41, all I'm asking for is someone to be kind, funny, handsome, but that is a very broad word for me. But I have a feeling you have your finger on the pulse, so I'd love for you to play Yenta or Matchmaker, if you will.
I will do my best. I'll keep my eye open for, unfortunately, right now I'm only seeing 3 people on a regular basis.
Got it.
In my COVID coven.
That's
but
I get it. Yeah.
We're getting it out there in the pod sphere. I'll put it out in chats.
Awesome. Well, it's great chatting with you. Thanks for having me on, and much continued success with this podcast.
Thanks. You too, Jay.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the show, my friend. Now stay connected by subscribing to GerleMen Podcast and sharing with your friends on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or anywhere else podcasts can be found. Visit the webpage at GerleMen.com, sign up for the newsletter, and find more details about each episode. Let's make this a conversation because I'd really like to hear from you. Join us on Facebook at GerleMen. Submit your questions, suggest topics, or just chat with your brothers. Want to add your own 2 cents? Use the voice memo feature on your smartphone. Ask a question or say anything. We just might play it on the podcast. Email the file to mike@gerlemen.com. Until next time.